Hi, I'm Linda Mowl, and welcome to Art This Week. On this week's episode, we visit the Amon Museum of American Art and speak with artist Laura Wilson about her exhibition, That Day. Now for Art This Week. Hi, I'm Linda Mowl, and I'm here at the Amon Museum of American Art speaking with photographer Laura Wilson about her current exhibition, That Day. Laura, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Linda. It's very, very nice to be here.
So this exhibition features work from several of your major bodies of work. Can you elaborate a little bit on a couple of the major projects that are included?
For the last 35 years, I've been photographing in the American West, and there are several books that I've already completed. Mm-hmm. One would be Avedon at Work, where I followed the photographer Richard Avedon throughout his period of time, 6 years in the American West, and photographed him at work. Mm-hmm. Another is a group of pictures that I did up in Montana, the Hutterites of Montana, and six-man football, mm-hmm. and then Watt Matthews of Lambshead, where I was on a ranch for several years photographing the great rancher, Watt Matthews, from Albany, Texas. And so there are several pictures from each of those bodies of work in this mm-hmm. exhibition, but also many pictures that have never been seen before, many pictures that I hadn't even really paid attention to. I had never enlarged them so that they were just in boxes, archival boxes, as contact sheets, contact prints, little small, sometimes even just a little small 35 millimeter print. So for me to see many of them big for the first time is interesting.
The subject matter is varied. The subjects are varied, but the exhibition really does seem to have a cohesiveness that describes your aesthetic or your way of working. Is that by design? Did that happen naturally, or was that something that came up in the curatorial process?
I think that came up in the curatorial process in that I was very concerned. I had all of these, what I felt were disparate stories. Mm-hmm. So I had 10 pictures on dog fighting. I had 50 pictures on another subject, and 25 pictures on another, 100 pictures on another, but how could they be together in an exhibition in a book? Mm-hmm. And I didn't quite know how to do that, but the designer of the book, Greg Wakabayashi, a brilliant designer who lives in New York, took all this disparate pile of pictures and made he at first did what we call a dummy, which is a book that gives one an idea of how the completed book would look. Mm-hmm. And I saw for the first time, oh, it's a series of short stories. Yes. And so it has a cohesiveness that I hadn't realized ahead of time until someone else, in this case the designer, Greg Wakabayashi, did the design of them.
So I'd like you to tell us a little bit about the exhibition title and how that theme is carried through.
I struggled with because there were so many different bodies of work, and even though they were all in the American West, I still wondered what can I title it? And I always like a title that's short. So for instance, Life magazine, Life, which was the title of a great photo magazine from the 30s, 40s, 50s, right up until the 60s, maybe even into the 70s. Mm-hmm. But it was a very dominant magazine, and the title is fantastic. Short, strong, simple, mm-hmm. And I wanted something like that. So I just couldn't, I was struggling what to call it. And a friend of mine actually said, what about That Day? And I thought, that's it. That day that I was down on the border and took those pictures of the drug smugglers as they were being pulled out of the brush. Mm-hmm. Or that day that I was up in Montana in the Judith Basin and the three cousins were galloping their horses over the open hill, this right picture behind us. So that day seemed perfect because I often think myself, well, let me search for the picture that I took that day. Mm-hmm.
And you take a very documentary approach around your photographs. I mean, each one of these photographs has a date exactly, so it's not like, oh, I was there that week. It really is specific to that day.
Yes. I hadn't realized that I would be able to date them as accurately as I have. But what happens in photographing is that I photograph with such focus and intensity, and in many cases obsession, that I would have in my notebook, I was there the week of February 22nd. Well, I actually remembered that on this day I photographed Mr. Longoria on the ranch, and then 2 days later, it wasn't the next day, but it was 2 days later that I photographed his brother, and I actually vividly remembered almost every single image that day that I took it. And I could date them all. I mean, I did have dates on many of them, but the ones I didn't have, it wasn't as hard as I had thought. I thought it was impossible.
So I know you're using really basic equipment. I heard you in an interview about the 6-man football, the 35 millimeter on-camera flash. Is that basically the same equipment that you use to shoot the majority of these photos, or?
Well, that was particularly elemental because I was on my own without an assistant. I'm not a sports photographer, but it happened, as I said in that interview, that it worked to my advantage because the pictures had a raw, kind of gritty look to them, elemental look, which actually suited 6-man football, which isn't polished, and it's not the NFL. And so it gave a look to the pictures of hometown and almost snapshot quality. But other pictures I have worked, I like natural light very much, and I'm most comfortable using natural light. So many of these were, for instance, the portrait of Donald Judd was taken. That was bright sunshine with a little bit of clouds, but not enough to make cloud cover. But I had an assistant who held an umbrella of silk, a silk umbrella over him, which created this lovely light on his face. And I was shooting that with 35 millimeter, but I often used a 2 1/4 camera. So Mr. Longoria on the ranch, on the Rio Grande, that's with a 2 1/4 camera, a Hasselblad, and that is on a tripod, and it's very stable. And so I'm not able to move around, and so the person must stand right in front of me and can't move back or forward because they'll go out of because he or she would go out of focus. So and then the Deerdorf I used too. That picture down in Gallery 1 of the ranch, old rancher Watt Matthews and his sister. That was with a very big 8x10 camera, that the kind of camera Matthew Brady would have used. So I've used a variety of different cameras, but generally I like to keep it simple because I don't think the camera matters. And I like to use natural light because that does matter. It gives a lovely quality to a face.
One thing that really interests me about your working practices is how long you'll spend on a project. Can you tell me, on an estimate, about how long you spend on a major project?
I try, of course, not to spend very much time at all, but it seems that I'm always drawn into the project and my own enthusiasm for the subject. And I also like to go back and re-photograph, and I feel pictures get stronger often. I can bring more depth and range to a body of work by going back to it. So I do like to work over a period of several days, or in the case of some of these projects, a number of years. I'm kind of horrified at the amount of time I've spent on, where did my life go? Well, it was 16 years photographing, or 14 years, whatever it is, on the Hutterites. And 6 years with Richard Avedon, photographing him at work. So that's why to look at these photographs now, even though I've done many other kinds of photography, subject matter, when I went back through this body of work, I realized that it was really a kind of a diary of 30 years of work. So even though I might have been doing other work in other parts of the country, in other countries, it was this body of work, these groups of pictures, which really kind of held me here in the American West.
So you've made much of your living outside of being an artist, but as a features photographer, and that spurred a number of projects in certain ways. Is that true?
Yes, because I worked for very, very good publications, the London Sunday Times, the magazine, the New York Times Magazine, the New Yorker, Wallpaper, which is a very good magazine of interiors and architecture, so that the assignments are always of great interest to me. And the editors know my work so that they would assign things that they think that I would particularly be able to respond to. So I've been very lucky that way. And oftentimes when I'm on assignment, I'll see something else that interests me. So for instance, I might be in Monterrey, Mexico, photographing this amazing new university building at the University of Monterrey, done by Tadeo Ando. While there, I saw a group of people. I had the opportunity to see a group of people who live in Mexico who are of Northern European origin, so that they're blonde and blue-eyed, even though they've been in this small village in Mexico, in the mountains of Monterrey, for several hundred years. So that I do feel lucky that I'm always kind of alert for something else that might be of interest to me.
You used the word obsession earlier, and I actually heard Avedon quote you once. He said that you had an obsession with the West that might not have been possible if you had been born there. Do you think that, or to what extent do you think that that's true?
I think it's accurate, and I think the fact that I grew up in a small town on the South Shore of Massachusetts, that I had I fell in love with the myth of the West and the romance of the West and the history of the West. So when I moved here with my husband in 1966, I thought, how lucky I am. Oh, here I am, right in the heart of where the West begins, in Fort Worth. And then I was very lucky to work for Richard Avedon for those 6 years, where we crisscrossed the West, going from the Canadian border down to the Rio Grande, and from the Rocky Mountains, from the West Coast to the Missouri River, the Mississippi River. We really saw all of the West in that period of time, and then I began to realize it's much more complex, much more complicated, and I haven't even begun to touch the newer immigrants, Asian immigrants who, for instance, are shrimp fishing in Houston or in other parts, and also cities. I haven't even touched the cities. I was particularly interested in the border of the Southwest and in certain regions in the other parts of the West.
Is it fair to say that your career really was just starting out when you started to work with Avedon, or that it started around that time?
Well, I think I always was looking and seeing and absorbing. I always took pictures, even when I was a child. And I think what happened was that by working with someone at the top of his game in the history of the medium, that it catapulted me from the minor leagues to the majors, and not just the majors, but the Yankees. Right in one gigantic leap. So I saw how an artist at the height of his career, what he thinks about, what concerns him, how he worked. It's the apprentice system. I mean, it was a very ancient way of learning and painting or sculpting. And so for me, it was a huge benefit to work with a person of Avedon's caliber at the period of time, and he was at the height of his career. And so it was huge.
Can you think of any particular experiences on the road with Avedon that might have really deepened your interest in the West, or refined the ways that you look at these communities?
Well, as Richard Avedon worked only with white paper and didn't use the environment in which the person lived, when we went to the Hutterite community, I knew that it was such an unusual group of people. I knew I had to come back and do I didn't know it would be a book, but I thought I knew it would be. I knew I could make a very important body of work by immersing myself in their culture. And so in that way, yes, even when I was working for Richard Abbott, I was thinking about how I might, on my own, come back and visit places that seemed to be of interest, which he, for his own reasons, didn't want to extend his work in.
Well, I find your work with the Hutterites really interesting, and partially just for the fact that they are photographs and the issue of access to these communities. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience of trying to gain access to photograph these people?
It was very, very hard to gain access to photograph them, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend. I've kind of turned away from. It's so exhausting to gain access, to gain access to famous people. I'm working on a project on writers right now, and it's exhausting to gain access to people who have been photographed so much that they don't feel they need yet again another photograph. Right. And in the case of the Hutterites, they forbid photography. So it was. I'm not sure. I think that I would encourage a young photographer to do that. But saying that, I still think how amazing it was that I had the sense of mission that one needs in order to do that. So I do feel that the time I spent was very worthwhile, and I'm glad I spent the time. And I'm glad, because nobody has those pictures. I mean, that is a portrait of a group of people that had never been done before, and it won't last, because already with cell phones and the internet and TV, things are coming in, and it's breaking down in a way that it hadn't when I had the opportunity to see these very unusual communities.
I would consider your work to be also a lot about storytelling. How conscious are you in the process of taking these pictures of carrying through a narrative that you know exists versus what the viewer might interpret when they see it?
I think that the storytelling is a side effect of the pictures, because when I'm sent into an environment, for instance, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, I was sent in by the Washington Post to do a story on reservation life. So they expected a certain kind of pictures. But I was so shocked by what I saw, the poverty, the unemployment, the alcoholism, that's what I responded to. And I took a series of pictures and portraits that in some way reflect that. And that was very hard for the Washington Post to accept, because they had in their own mind, their magazine was a Sunday magazine, and that was to be seen by families. And they felt that many of the pictures I took were just too harsh a view. But the story, I'm not thinking of a story, I'm thinking of strong pictures. And I'm thinking, and I suppose it does tell a story, but I don't, I think maybe it's unintentional.
So it's certainly easy, maybe even almost involuntary, to connect with a person that's right in front of you. It's a totally different thing for a viewer to come into a museum such as this and see an image on the wall and connect to the person. Are you able to distinguish in the moment the images that'll really hold the wall, or is that something that you figure out later in editing?
I'm able to see it almost right away now with all these years of experience. So for instance, I just photographed a writer, an English writer, and he was very difficult, and he didn't want to give me the time of day, and he didn't want to give me much time, I should say. He didn't want to give me, he gave me very limited time, and he said, 15 minutes, that's all I'll give you. No more, 15 minutes, I'm too busy. I'm going to America tomorrow, I've got all my packing to do, and I said, well, I would like more time. No, that's it, if you don't do. So I said, all right. So when I saw him, I knew what he looked like, but I hadn't seen recent photographs of him. When I saw him there in front of me, I thought, oh, he has a good face. Then, when he stood in front of the camera, I thought, it's amazing. It's an amazing face. And he said to me, as he was standing in front of the camera, before I had taken any pictures at all, he said, all right, tell me what you want. I'll give you happy, serious, whatever you want, angry, you tell me what you want. So I said, no, it's just perfect, just the way you are. And it's a fantastic face. And it's all there. Everything about what I feel the creative life is on his face. And so I knew instantly, I had taken maybe 2 frames. I knew it was great. I also knew I didn't even need 15 minutes. I knew I had it. There couldn't be anything better. So no matter what he did, no matter how I talked to him, it wasn't going to get better than those first few frames. And so, yes, and I think I do. I mean, Jimmy Dale Gilmore has an amazing face. So yes, I mean, I chose him because I thought he was interesting looking and had an unusual face. It isn't about so much handsomeness. It isn't about beauty. It's about a face that can express emotion.
This year is the 30th anniversary of In the American West and the 10th anniversary at the Amon Carter of your exhibit, Avedon at Work. Can you tell me a little bit about the significance of having this work shown in this space at this time?
I think it's very significant to me. I was young, right out of school, when my husband and I moved here in 1966, and because this was a museum of Western, at that time, Western art. I don't even think it was called American art at that time. I couldn't wait to get over here from Dallas to see the museum, and I immediately loved this museum. I love the way it sits on the land up high. It overlooks a mesquite tree, this beautiful, strong, ornery tree, this mesquite tree, and then beyond that, a Henry Moore, a mansion. I come all the way from this tiny town in New England, and here's a beautiful Henry Moore on the doorstep of a museum in the West. So the mesquite tree, the Henry Moore, and then in the distance, Fort Worth, the great skyline of Fort Worth. So to be back here after
30
years, it's terrific, and it's very, very moving to me. And so to have in this gallery that we're in right now, G20, and I look across and I see Remington and Russell, I couldn't be more proud to be in this museum and to be opposite Remington and Russell. It's a great, great thrill for me.
So Laura, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed the questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
We want to thank Laura for speaking with us. For more information on the exhibition, go to cartermuseum.org. That's it for Art This Week. Thanks for watching.
I still got your Polaroid.